Okay, so a little bit of vocabulary here. Guys, you really probably know what this stuff is. You may or may not though, so just you may want to make a couple little notes here. But I want to ask the first question. Somebody explain to me, what's the difference between an apartment and a condo?
You rent apartments.
You rent apartments, Ethan, and
You buy condos.
okay, so yeah, it's the difference between renting and actually owning, right? So you rent or lease an apartment, but a condo you actually outright own, right? So you didn't know that?
No.
Okay, well then I'm glad that you thought what? Is there more that we should?
I thought condos was like for the people. I thought condos were just like bigger, yeah. Like an apartment is like just like
Condos, there are some condos that are really small, quite honestly. But it's the difference between owning that. Now, in many instances, people own like the condominium unit, but then they rent it out, right?
So would you be living in a condo then?
That means you can rent a condo, so if there's a condominium.
Yes, no, I mean, anything that we own, right? It could be the same thing if we're talking about a single family home, like in terms of ownership, if you notice up there, I've got single family home, right? That's one family living in that particular dwelling. Homes can be rented also, right?
So
But
if I'm renting a condo, does that make it an apartment?
no, it's still a condo.
So if you buy an
It's that the entire building, think about the entire building, right? Either the entire building is rented out, like apartments, but if you're in a condominium, if you're in a condominium complex, then there are individual people who own each of those different units. Now, whether they choose to actually rent that out, then you can do that as well. But think about like the building itself. You're right, when you look at buildings, a lot of times you can't tell whether it's an apartment or a condo. They look alike. Typically they are the same size. Sometimes they are that type of thing. But many instances you can't really tell them apart. All right. You may or may not have heard the term tenant. That's a person who rents. That's a renter. Right? The landlord is the owner. And it could be of an apartment complex, it could be the owner of a condominium, right? The term, when I've got expires here, what I'm really thinking about is you sign a lease. So sometimes they use the terms interchangeably to talk about rent and leasing an apartment. You sign a lease before that's your agreement that you sign prior to moving into an apartment, that type of thing. When you sign that, they're typically like for a year, that type of thing, but then that expires and you have to like re-sign up again and sign a new contract or else go to a new place, that type of thing, right? So that's the idea. That's why I've got that term expires there. What does it mean to evict somebody?
Kick them out.
Kick them out. Why?
Because they broke the lease.
Okay, so typically it's because they're not paying their rent. It can be for other reasons, but usually it has to do with not paying. So if a renter is forced to leave, it could be for other reasons, like especially if you're renting like in a condo unit, and the condominiums tend to have very strict rules and guidelines, an HOA set up, a homeowners association, when they have very strict rules. And if you've got a renter in there that's making a lot of noise and there's kind of noise rules, or if they're damaging the property, that type of thing, they can be evicted also. And then this could be the case if we're talking about furnished or unfurnished. Some homes you buy furnished and unfurnished, but typically when we're talking furnished and unfurnished, we're talking about apartments, right? And then we talked a little bit of some of the ownership options here: a single family home, the condominium that we own, Co-op's not really anything that is very common here. It's common in other countries, I would say. What does it mean if we've got a multifamily home?
Multiple families living at home.
Multiple families are living in the home. So it could be like some people, they have extended family that's living, so greater than or equal to 2 families that are living in a particular dwelling. A lot of times it's kind of like extended families, right? Like it's a brother and his family living there along with another brother or something like that. Peyton?
So it's not like a townhouse?
Townhouse, when we say townhouse, typically that's synonymous with condo, but not always. Townhouse is typically considered to be a condominium.
So I used to live in it was like a house, but like half of it was our house.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's another term. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's kind of another, so duplex means, and here I think we probably have duplexes in this area, but sometimes in some areas there's like triplexes. Like they've got 3 kind of attached together, that type of thing. I think in Baldwin Park it's kind of that way in some places where they've got quite a few that are put together. So I think that's kind of the idea of a townhouse too, Peyton, right? The idea of a co-op is it's like that there's a corporation that owns this, and then you own shares of that particular property kind of as an investment, and then you live there. And like I said, this is kind of we don't have many co-ops here in this area, but there's overseas there's a lot of this. So you are buying into shares of that, and then typically you live there. Okay? All right. Kind of just some vocabulary. It sounds like you guys are pretty good on that, so I'm not going to dwell on that a whole lot. Let's just talk about kind of some of the general math or some of the other ideas here. In general, experts agree that as a rule, a prospective renter, so we're talking rent primarily today, we're going to be talking about ownership later on down the road, but we're going to talk mostly renting today. So experts agree that as a rule, a prospective renter should budget 25 to 30% of their gross income for the rent. So that means before any deductions, right? Before deductions. Because there are a lot of other things that take up our money. If you're spending like 50% on your rent, then you're going to run out of money, right? So this is kind of a ballpark figure. Ideally, you want to spend on the lower side of that, just because you just don't know what your expenses are going to be. So, like I said, if this is figured by gross, then there's other deductions that have to happen. You've got a whole lot of other expenses. You've got electricity, you've got a water bill, you've got a cell phone, you've got just general spending, groceries, shopping that has to be done. So this is just kind of a general guideline that is used. So first type of problem that you're going to see using the mathematics is this: using this interval, find the monetary range recommended for the monthly housing budget in each situation. So if Penny makes $4,500 per month, let's write a compound inequality. So we're going to write a compound inequality to represent, we're going to think about what 25% of that amount would be, what 30% would be. That's going to give us this compound inequality. So Penny should be spending approximately what percent or what amount of money? So 0.25% of or 0.25, of this 4,500, what does that give us?
11.5.
Okay, so 11.25. So Penny should spend somewhere between 11.25 up to how much? $13.50 is the most Penny should spend in for rent on an apartment, right? All right. Let's think about this situation. Mark makes $39,000 per year. So let's figure out what the monthly expenditure is going to be. So what do we have to do with that $39,000 first? Divide by 12, there you go. So let's divide by 12. So that gives us $32.50 a month. So then let's find those percentages and write this in compound inequality here. So on the low end, what should Mark budget? 812.5, sounds good. Up to no more than, yeah, $975. Okay, so pretty straightforward and easy. We're just looking at kind of coming up with this compound inequality to say this is kind of the range of where they should be spending. If they can be spending less than that, that would be good, right? Okay, so let's look at kind of some examples of that, and then we'll move on. We're not going to dwell on this a whole lot. Yeah. Well, why don't you guys try that one? Because I want to talk you through number 6. So try this one for yourself, right? This is given per year and is looking to find a new apartment rental. Searched online, found an apartment for $1,500 a month. The recommendation is to budget between 25 to 30% of monthly income for rent. Can Adina afford the apartment based on the recommended interval? So you guys try that. We'll talk in a sec. Kind of 2 ways to think through this one. So it wasn't specifically asking you to state what's the interval like we looked at up above. So you could definitely find that, but what's the other thing you could do?
She uses money that she has enough for the rest.
Okay, so kind of look at basically the high spot, right? The high value, the most that she should actually spend based on what the suggestion is. So we need to do that 50. Whoops, let's change here to. So we need to do that 56,000 divided by 12. What did that give us? 46, 66, 67. Okay, and so we could come up with the interval, but the other way to deal with this, the way this question was worded, what we really need to do is just figure out what's 30% of this amount right here. So if we just do 30% times that amount, that's the most she should spend. How much is that value? 1,400. And the apartment that she was looking for is for 1,500, so we got a problem, don't we? That's too much. Otherwise, she could start dealing with some financial issues just in terms of paying all of her bills, that type of thing, right? The issue for a lot of people, especially right now, is that rent just seems to be going up. Like rents are going absolutely crazy. So in some instances, it might be the case that you have to kind of re-budget things and think about how you're gonna deal with your spending so that you can have more money in your budget to pay the rent, but it means you're gonna have to cut back in other places because you still have other bills and other things you've got to deal with, right? Okay. This one's a little more involved, so I kind of wanted to talk through this with you. So it says Bethany's monthly gross income is this $38.40. She pays 24% of her monthly gross earnings in federal and state taxes, 15% for her student loan. She uses 15% of her monthly gross income to pay toward her credit card balance. So she's obviously racked up a huge credit card balance and has a lot of money to pay back. And she wants to rent an apartment that will cost $1,800 a month. Will she be able to afford the apartment after making her other payments? So we've got to do some figuring here. So we need to figure out I'm kind of trying to color code this. So There's her monthly income here, 24% in federal and state taxes. So how much is that gonna be?
921 times 6.
We're gonna add up all of this stuff. What did you get? 921, 60. Okay, so that's the federal, state taxes, student loan.
It's $576
Okay,
for both, I guess. I mean, you have to add them up.
okay, so that's $576. And then what else?
What's the first number?
Again.
15% is her credit card balance. So let me get that in there too. Katie, hold on. What was your question?
What's the first number?
921.60. Sorry. Okay, credit card balance, how much was that? That was 576 also, isn't it? Okay. All right, so that's a total of how much?
2,073.
I'm sorry, say that again.
2,073.60.
Okay. And so then we need to deduct that from her 3840. So 3840 minus this 2073.60.
1766.
1766.4. So then we would need to kind of figure out, okay, what's the most she should spend here? What's the interval for this? 960, no more than 1152. So what do you think?
Can't afford it.
Not really, can she?
Wait, should you still do the interval after?
You wouldn't have to for that. I put it on there just to,
Like, say the interval was like, I don't know, 1,800 something, or not the interval, but that number, and then the interval was less, would you still say now? Would you say, because it says,
say that again. Okay,
it says
so.
will she be able to afford after making the other payments?
Right, well, think about this. She's spent all of that other money, so she's got $1,766 to make it through the month. So if she's spending $1,152 on an apartment, then she's got, what, how much money?
Yeah, no. I know.
$600 maybe to live off of for all of those other things,
But
which isn't gonna happen.
Question, just asking for that initial, like the 1,766.4, because it's not like, I don't know.
Right,
Well, you could just
Yeah.
say no after you realize that she really doesn't have $1,800 after she pays, like, taxes.
How did you get the she should spend 960 to 1152?
30%.
I did my 25 to 30% of her,
I got 529.8.
okay, so some more vocabulary. When you are renting or leasing an apartment, there are a lot of fees that happen, a lot of things that are going into that. So you do not just go in there with like, cool, I don't have any money, but I can go into this apartment lease. They are checking up on you initially before they even allow you to move into an apartment. So the application deposit, there's gonna be a fee that it's basically like a processing fee, more or less. It's about $100 to $400. Okay. Security deposit, you pay that to the landlord, and that's in case of damage or that type of thing. So security deposit, usually you hear the term first and last. And what that means is that you end up, you pay for the first month's rent, you pay for the last month's rent ahead of time. in some instances, in some areas, and it's because it's so competitive, they can ask for you to pay even more than that. But this is for the landlord kind of security, so that if you've damaged the property, then they've got some money to make repairs. Okay? Yes, they check your credit, so you have to pay for that. They run a credit report to see, are you making money and are you making a decent amount? This is usually about $25. Sometimes it's a little bit more than that. And it's not necessarily here a thing that happens, but a lot of big cities, you end up with a broker fee because you're paying somebody to help you find an apartment. Especially in big cities where there's just such a high demand, you kind of need help. You need an in order to find a good place. So, and there you usually get a percentage of whatever the rent is what you pay to that broker. And like I said, that's kind of a big city type thing. Not necessarily, I don't know if they do that kind of in our area or not. So what we've got to look at are just some examples of kind of some of the different fees that are going to be, that you would have to pay along with your monthly rent and all of that type of stuff. All right, so let's look at an example here. Maria is renting an apartment that will cost $15.95 a month. She must pay a $200 application fee. I'm going to kind of highlight $200 application fee, $25 credit report fee. Security deposit is equal to 1 month's rent and must also pay the last month's rent. So that's a first and last. So that's 2 months worth of rent before you even move in. Her broker charges 5% of the yearly rent for finding the apartment. How much is she expected to pay upfront in order to rent this apartment? So let's do some math here. So we know we've got the $15.95, right? Yeah, and we're gonna have that twice, right? And then what else? We've got the $200 for the application fee. And then the credit report fee of $25. And then 5%, let's figure out what that 0.05, I'm sorry? Okay, check.
Multiply it by 12 and then
$79.
I got 957.
Okay, yeah, I got $9.57 for the broker. I'm kind of hearing a few different things, so I want to, Claire, you had a question.
Oh, no.
I got $9.57. Is that what you guys got? Okay. Go back and check your math on that, Sutton, maybe?
I said that.
Oh, I thought you said $9.75.
You might have said it wrong, but
Okay,
I have it down.
but that's what you meant. Okay, so we've got first and last, we've got application fee, the credit report fee, and then the broker fee. So how much altogether does she have to pay to get in? $43.72. A lot of money. Okay. All right, we're not going to work through this next example, but I want to point something out to you on this one. Must pay $100 application fee, $10 credit report fee. His security deposit is 2 months' rent, and he must also pay last month's rent. So in this case, if you were doing the math for this one, you would be plugging in 3 months' worth of rent plus all of those other charges on that one, right? So make a note about that. 3 months plus other charges. We're not going to work through that. I have faith in you guys that you can do that, but just read carefully, right? Okay, so besides the cost of actually renting that facility, you also need to think about your moving costs. So You may or may not be aware of the fact that it's actually cheaper, like if you're renting a vehicle to move, right? You usually have to rent a truck or something in order to do the move. Weekday moves, Monday through Friday, are gonna be cheaper than a weekend move. In terms of charges typically. You may be charging, it's possible that you're charging people to load and unload furniture, so big bulky furniture, that type of thing. So that would be for like furniture and boxes and that type of thing possibly. Some people actually pay, I want to keep track of my stuff a little bit better than this, but some people actually do pay people to like pack up the whole house and move the whole house, that type of thing, because they just don't want to deal with it or whatever. So you have to think about your packing costs and your and the unpacking costs as well. So let's take a look here at just an example of this. If you notice, it says $95 per hour for loading and unloading, $80 per hour for packing and unpacking, $2.50 per mile for the truck rental, and there's the amount that he's actually, the distance is 200 miles, and they need, let's see, I want to try to color code this, 9 hours of loading and unloading, and 7 hours of packing and unpacking. And what will the moving costs be? Keep in mind, notice, guys, this important little detail at the very end. You gotta pay tax too on this. How crazy is that, right? All right, so let's figure out our charges. So we've got 9 hours of loading and unloading. So that's 9 times 95. Plus, what is it? 7 times 80 for our packing and unpacking. And then plus 250 times the 200 miles. And is that everything? I think so. That's in terms of all of the charges. So we get a total for that. That gives us $19.15, I think. And then we've got to pay tax. And in this case, the tax is 0.0725. Yeah. Okay, so total cost would be that for this would be $2,053.84. Okay? All right. Similar question, we're not gonna work through this. I just wanna point out a couple of things on this one. If you notice, on this one, it's kind of telling you charges here. So, they're giving you the distance here, the number of hours for each of those, $8 in tax, 8% tax, and then it's telling us, here's the loading and unloading fee, here's the packing and unpacking, and that's the distance in miles to figure out the costs, okay? So we're not gonna work through that one. I have faith in you guys that you can deal with that. So let's take a look. Last little bit of what we're gonna look at is, today is the mathematics part of it. This is actually more algebra than anything, which is kind of weird to think that we're actually gonna do some true algebra in here. We're gonna be given systems of equations that we have to set up, okay? And if we're solving systems of equations, remember there are 3 different ways in order to solve. There is elimination, there is graphing. Are we gonna wanna graph these? No, probably not. And you can use substitution, although I will tell you that in general, what you're gonna find is the easiest way in order to solve these problems is gonna be through elimination. So I kind of want to review just the basic algebra before we actually look at some examples on the next page of how these are going to work, okay? Basically, we're going to be working backwards and we're going to be figuring out, okay, how much are the charges that they are charging for different things. So that's the context of these problems, okay? So elimination method, if you think about it, if you remember back from your algebra days, our goal is to add the two equations together and for one of the variables to eliminate or disappear. When we add the two equations together, we want one of the variables to eliminate. We know how to solve for one variable, we don't know how to solve for two at the same time. So, I don't know, thoughts or ideas?
Multiply the bottom one by 3.
Okay, multiply the bottom one by 3, sounds good. Okay, oh, someone just said -3. Why should it be -3, not +3? So that, ideally, we want to be able to just add these together.
It has to be negative, so then 3y plus, or minus -3.
Yeah.
I mean, equals 0.
So if we're gonna, if we think of it as adding them together, then we want the signs in front of a single variable to be the same, but we want them to be opposite signs, so that when we add them, they add to 0. I think, Sutton, if you want to think of it as multiplying by 3, that's fine, but then you have to remember to subtract.
Yeah.
So as
no,
long
I
as
think-
you remember to subtract, then you're gonna be fine.
I thought you were supposed to subtract, not add. Different.
Okay, so this one's gonna stay the same. So watch here. For me personally, I would rather deal with the signs first. Excuse me. A tickle in my throat. All right, hold on a second, let me. All right, so this way, see Sutton, we've got opposite signs. So if we add straight down right away, we've got -7x. This disappears, right? That eliminates, and then we're left with -14. So we divide by that -7 and we get x is equal to 2.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of doing elimination as like, I think elimination as like subtraction.
Of subtraction. And if you want to just multiply through by that +3 and then remember to subtract, that's fine. I just be careful with that you remember to subtract in each case. All right, we need more than just that x equals 2. By the way, if you were to solve here and you got a value of that were negative, would probably be a good sign that something's not quite right, right? Because we're talking about values that should be positive here in terms of the context here. All right, if x is equal to 2, what do we do to figure out what y is? We just plug in to either one, it doesn't matter. Pick whatever seems easiest. I'm gonna plug into this bottom one, so 3 times 2 plus y equals 8. So y equals 2. Okay, so we would have that point 2, 2, right? Okay. This one is a little bit more involved with elimination. It's personal preference whether you decide you want to eliminate the x's or the y's on this one. Why don't you try this one yourself? And we'll go over it in a minute.
It's actually filled with.
Whoops, let me get this on. All right, what do we get here, guys? X is
We can't say
10. Well, but you're supposed to do it. What'd you get?
y is 8, x is 10.
There you go. X is 10, y is 8. Okay? All right, so let's see the context of these problems. Let's take a look here. So a moving company gave Mike 2 quotes. Determine the hourly rates for loading and unloading and packing and unpacking. So what they've said, this moving company has said, for 3 hours of loading and unloading, 2 hours of packing and unpacking, the total cost would be this amount. For 5 hours of loading and unloading, 2 hours of packing and unpacking, the total would be this amount. So we're setting up a system of equations that then we've got to solve. So think about what that's saying. So that's saying, let's decide what's what here, right? We need to call this x and y. So let's call the loading and unloading our x and our packing and unpacking y, just so that we can kind of keep that straight, right? So this is saying that then that we have 3x plus 2y equals 480. And let's see, loading and unloading, they didn't switch the order. Just be careful with that. So 5x plus 2y equals 680. All right, so from there, this one's really easy to eliminate, right? We can basically just, we've got the same y's, so we can just kind of subtract right away. So let's do that. So we subtract those, so 5 minus 3 is 2x. The y's eliminate. We get 680 minus 480 is 200. So x is 100. So $100 for loading and unloading. And then we've got to go back and plug in to figure out so 480 minus, so 180 divided by 2, so 90. So $90 for packing. And that's a 9. Oh my goodness. Let me fix that. There we go. Hello. Okay. Do we need to try another one of these? We're skipping this one. Do we need to try another one of those, or do you think you guys are good on that? I think you're good. Okay. And you're going to have some practice for this anyway. So here's the deal. Section 1 has a ton of material in it. So we're actually going to wait and deal with the scatter plot and regression business when we look at section 7.2. So there'll be a little bit that you're going to go back and do. I kind of had to adjust homework because I had forgotten about that, because you're going to do some of 7.1 practice with the 7.2, okay? All right, but this is in your workbook in terms of your homework. So in the workbook for section 7.1, I don't remember what page it is. Let me look. Starts on page 110. And I think it goes on to page 111, but I don't remember. So you're going to do 1 through 5. And 10 and 12 and 13. Okay, so like I said, we'll come back for day 2. We will look at talking about scatter plots and regression. Please make sure you have a charged functioning graphing calculator with you for that.
That's the homework.
And then we'll do the rest of 7.2. So yes, because it's really, the other part of 7.2 is really short. So that's classwork. I purposefully wanted to kind of go as quickly as possible so you'd have time to get started. You can work on it now. You got 18 minutes that you could probably get it done so you don't have homework. That's classwork / homework, yes.